Sounds good. Another Monday, Ben.
Another Monday, Max.
Yes.
Another Monday, everybody in the chat.
Monday, Ben.
Oh,
Monday, Max.
Yeah, we're
We've
monitoring
got
the
the
chat
chat
from Ben's
open.
phone. Turns out it's going to talk to us.
There we go.
Well, welcome to Max and Ben Save the World. We're so excited to be back after several months off here.
Yeah, we're excited to see all of you, whether you're joining us here live on Twitch or in one of our replays on YouTube or one of our non-live presentations in the future. We're glad to have you.
Reruns. Yep, absolutely. So this season we're going to be talking about the aspects of men's health, and we thought it would make sense to start with kind of like mental, intellectual health this time. So this is how to be a mentally healthy man. Before we get started, we want to mention that this podcast is not a replacement for therapy. Yes, we're both two therapists. Yes, we're both talking to each other. Yes, we're in my office where I do therapy. But if you actually need therapy or mental health help, please do go to like psychologytoday.com, look up therapists. There's many people there. You can Google therapists near me, and if you're in crisis, you can always dial 988, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline in the U.S. And there's similar services abroad, I believe. On this show, Ben and I try to model, having opinions, sometimes agreeing, sometimes disagreeing, really diving into topics with real meaning and kind of depth. If you do find that, you're kind of disagreeing with us, I encourage you to talk about it in the chat, and we'd love to hear from you, love to talk about it. We really believe that positive dialogues creates, everyone feeling better, honestly, in the end.
I think
So,
it creates a better connected world. And I heard a quote recently from Chip and Joanna Gaines, actually.
Okay.
But I heard Joanna Gaines say recently that she feels as though everyone should feel welcome at her table, and that everybody has a story that's worth telling.
Yeah.
And I thought that was a great way of putting an inclusive environment where we can talk about things that may be really close to home and important to us, but in a way that's respectful of each other, as well as exploring what makes each other tick and just the way that other people live their lives.
Yeah, I really like that.
Yeah,
absolutely.
me too.
So, and then Ben, I think you have a recognition for today.
Oh yeah, I wanted to recognize the TikTok creator Tom Fell. His is Tom Fell. Is he all right? I think he makes a lot of satirical videos that I think carry a really positive message. He kind of uses sarcasm to break the ice on topics like not giving yourself too much at work was the example that I showed Max right before we started here today. But he has a lot of fun absurdist humor about kind of living in 2025 post-pandemic. He had some great opinions on the pandemic as well, and kind of just accepting the reality that we live in, and that we're emotional beings, and we're beings that have needs and wants that don't always align with maybe what society's pressures tell us to do. And he's been a really positive and encouraging voice that's been coming across my feed a lot lately. So go ahead and check out Tom Fell if you're interested. That's Fell, like you fell down.
Just know.
Yeah, and with that, speaking of mental health and positive things, we decided that this season of the podcast, we were going to focus on the holistic self and what it means to be a healthy man. And what better way for two therapists to open that door than by starting with the aspect of mental health. I think that viewers will find that our lens is going to be coming from that in a lot of ways as we go on to talk about more in depth the other topics beyond today's mental health discussion in how they relate back to mental health. And so we wanted to get kind of a groundwork conversation going for our first episode back here for season 3 about what makes a man healthy mentally. And so why don't we just start with what do you do to be mentally healthy, Max?
Well, off the top of my head, I'd say I try and have a work-life balance where, I'm kind of working enough to feel good about myself, but also resting enough so that I can feel chill. And a lot of times it's about what am I doing when I'm resting that I actually can kind of feel better. If I'm really just kind of investing in, my home all the time, and I'm not really actually sitting down and chilling with my friends or family, that might not necessarily be super restful. If I'm only working on things, I do think that intellectual health is something that I think of when I think of the mental aspect. I know that we're both therapists. We're kind of talking about what makes a mentally healthy man, like overall many aspects this season. And I feel like today I do want to focus on kind of like the intellectual thing. Like I enjoy curiosity in a way, and so zooming in on that, I like trivia. I like playing Jeopardy. I like
You like to
doing
keep sharp.
crosswords. I like keeping sharp that
Yeah.
way, and I think that sometimes in the last few years, work has really disabled me from doing that. That I very much like focus so much on work and like starting my business now and finishing my PhD program that I haven't been able to focus on that as much. And I think that in today's world, when we're really thrown in so many different directions because of technology and many different relationships in our families, that it can be really hard to just kind of be like, no, I'm doing something to stay sharp. I was on a family road trip recently, and I read Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and I'm like, okay, great. I'm doing like the mentally sharp thing, but I'm also kind of like, it feels like sometimes just everything else seems to take a priority over am I learning more a little bit. So that's one thing that I thought of coming into today's episode. But I think that sometimes we also consider to be mentally healthy is not only intellectually healthy but also kind of like emotionally healthy in many ways. And so for me, that's being able to get out my feelings when I have them. That I can call a friend like Ben and be like, hey Ben, I'm having a rough day and like X, Y, and Z are happening, and please just be there to listen to me right now because I'm not having a good time. And I think that that's really helpful too, is having moments like that, and are being able to do that in our lives. So
Yeah, I agree. I like the categories of emotional and intellectual health that you shared. I think that maybe this will fit in one of your two categories already, but another one that maybe is half of a category that might add would be like cognitive health,
Yeah.
or cognitive capacity. But for myself, I've been as you know, but maybe our viewers don't. I'm a therapist that's been fighting the burnout monster for a couple of years, and I've been focusing more on individual creative pursuits. My mental health has been surrounding, asking myself honestly and earnestly, some questions, big questions about like the meaning of life and purpose and what is fulfilling. And I find myself following that path of what feels fulfilling more often lately. As you know, I write fiction occasionally in my free time, and that's been rather fulfilling, but also pursuing other educational interests as I see fit and as they come up. Just recently, I had another season of being very into my 3D printer, and I took that next step in self-teaching 3D modeling to myself, and finding a whole discipline that is new. It was such an endeavor in that keeping one intellectually sharp, while also being curious and creative, because ultimately it's sculpting but in a digital sense. And
Yeah.
I am somebody that I feel like is a very creative person. I just finished a new Gundam model kit that I'm very excited about last week, and I put all I finished putting water slide decals on today to give it all the extra oomph, and to look nice and fresh. And those creative pursuits, as well as having regular time. I think one of the things that I think keeps me mentally healthy is you're involved in this, but regular. I have a regular standing date where I go hang out with my friends, and I know I can rely on. Usually, unless I'm doing something or everybody's doing something, we're gonna get together. And that time, having that set in as a schedule and being sacred within my relationship at home with my wife in such a way that there's a healthy and respected boundary there of this is important to me and something that I fills up my cup, so to speak, and it is important to do. I think that that's one of the things that I would cite as a strong boon to myself in keeping mentally healthy.
Social relationships.
We play nerdy games, right?
Yeah.
We play board games and Magic the Gathering and stuff
He's
like that.
wearing a Venom
so-
shirt. He's a nerd.
Yeah, I am a nerd.
Yeah.
And so that just with the territory, what do nerds do when they get together? They play games of intellectuality against each other, and so
Yeah.
that's quite a lot of fun. But we're kind of talking about what's been helpful for us. What do we think, though? It might be a good idea to spitball together, the two of us, and create a picture of what is a mentally healthy person mean. Anyway.
So something that you had just said a little bit ago, Ben, really
Yeah.
resonated with me. The idea of like trying to find my purpose. You know, you shared about just having a little bit of burnout recently. I think that many of us who are in the field have been there, who are even maybe not in the field have been there. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that finding your purpose can feel very daunting and difficult. And I think that there's a lot of guys who even will get to situations in their life where they have a lot of the things that they want, and then they go, now what?
Mm-hmm.
Like what's the purpose? Why am I really here? Is it really just like getting married, having kids, and having a house? Is that actually like the meaning of my life? Because I was asking myself that when I was like 18,
Yeah.
but now I'm like 30 and that's happened and I still don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
What,
And
what really is.
then what happens, right?
Yeah, there's
Yeah.
more of like a then what, and
Yeah.
really, are we just like semi-sentient like beings that are kind of on a rock in space? I mean,
Yeah.
like yes and no.
Well, and I think as a culture we joke about it a bit.
Yeah.
I feel like I see memes all the time of like, particularly right intergenerationally. I could go off on a whole other thing of how all the generations are just the same in a cycle, but
Okay.
the intergenerationally,
Next episode.
yeah, maybe millennials just had now I'm getting a little bit dated with my memes, but last year the meme was going around of as a millennial man, as you're entering your 30s, you pick one of two
No,
things.
no.
Either you get into barbecue or World War II history, right?
No, Ben, you missed the whole marathons. You missed the
Oh
podcast.
yes,
cult.
pickleball.
Pickleball,
Yeah, we're
yes,
making a podcast
yes.
right now. Right. There's all of these things that like right we shuffle into categories, and I think men have done it for a long time. Woodworking hobbyists in their basements, guys that tinker on cars, guys that go archery shooting. I could sit and name pastimes forever, but and that leads into a whole other conversation about third spaces disappearing in our society. But I think it's worthwhile to ask the question a bit about is that it? Is that do you have to just pick World War II history or barbecuing
Podcasts,
or
yes.
podcasts, right? Or true crime documentaries or what have you. And we as a culture have this phenomenon where we want to label an identity around what we do so much. And I would argue, as somebody that's been out of the workforce for a bit and observing it from the outside, maybe that's because we as a culture are very attached to our work and our vocation as being core to our identities
Well,
in potentially a problematic way.
one of the
Uh,
top questions that you get asked when you meet someone is, what do you do for work? And
Absolutely.
I do think that in 2025 things have changed a little bit, that it's not as like as huge. Like
Oh,
if
yeah.
you end up talking to someone about, Ben and I both play Magic the Gathering, yes nerds. If someone meets you and you know that they play Magic, maybe you'll just talk to them about Magic for 30 minutes instead of what they do for work, getting to know them or whatever, and you get to know them on a different level, on a hobby level. And I do think that a lot of people nowadays are identifying by their hobbies a little bit more than they used to. I do think that all people, especially men, definitely need a sense of competence from something that they're doing. They want to feel like they're good at something. If you think about the young boy who really struggles at losing at Connect Four, a lot of times it's because maybe he doesn't feel good about himself and he wants to feel good about doing something. Maybe he doesn't do very well in math class. Maybe he doesn't do very well at sports and feels like he wants to compensate at that. But it's probably difficult for him to express it at that time. Honestly, I'll still get heated sometimes if I lose. If I think XYZ wasn't fair, or I'm just in a bad mood that day because I had been taking care of myself, been working too much that week, right? I do think that there's a lot of layers there, and sometimes the tinkering that you mentioned, there's research that suggests that if you are going through something very difficult emotionally, doing something really concrete and just
Menial.
very
Yeah.
what's the word you use?
Menial.
Menial. Yeah, menial. Yeah, I like that. Like,
Driving long distance,
washing
fixing a
the
car,
dishes,
washing the dishes.
my dad would always go for a drive if he was upset when I was growing up. I mean, many things like that are just kind of like, you can do that and you'll feel a little bit more grounded than you did before because you were able to complete something that maybe you weren't able to complete something more emotionally difficult that day.
I think something that I heard in what you were sharing there is, first, I've really noticed in our conversations and in being professional friends and whatnot, that competency piece is really one of those things that is part of your core to your theory of being.
I do say it a lot.
And I like it. I point that out not to say that I disagree, but to say that I see that as something that I've heard you talk about it several times, and I tend to agree with just about everything you say when you talk about it. And when you were talking about this most recent time here, I found myself being an 8-year-old, 9-year-old boy, actually, and to try and spread it for it to be as applicable to as many viewers as possible. I think it could be anything, but for me, it was being an 8-year-old and being interested in the chess club at school.
Oh, sure.
And I think that thought to me, as I thought about being an 8-year-old, I didn't really have parents that were into chess. My dad knew the rules, my mom didn't, right? But my dad wasn't like into chess in a way that would be encouraging to an 8-year-old. You know, he wasn't about to become, you know, a volunteer adult or something in that regard. And that's actually where my mind went. Was I remember, you know, struggling to learn the rules and then feeling those feelings of accomplishment and competency as you know, my teacher that I really enjoyed was the after school you know, support that was running the chess club.
Yeah.
And with that, I actually that spurred me to think all of this to say, I think that there's a level of connection as well. I would almost say competency and connection hand in hand is often what people are looking for, especially when you think about these things like activities like going out and doing like pickleball is the rage right now and stuff. And I think that there is some level of mental health aspect that, of course, we're going to get to, because social health is one of the health aspects that you and I have decided is in one of the episodes in this series.
Addressing male loneliness. Huh?
Yeah. And just elephant in the room. I think that it would be remiss for us not to come right out in the first episode that we're talking about health. Whether you agree with the intensity, whether you use the same language or not, I just heard Laura Ingraham and Tommy Lahren call it a male loser epidemic just last month on Fox News.
How constructive.
Or the male loneliness epidemic. Something is going on with our men and boys in the United States.
I think globally.
And globally.
I mean, in Asia, I can't remember.
100%.
This is terrible that I can't remember if it's China or Japan, but there's a movement of like men who are like leaving the workforce to just like protest and just be at home.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's Japan. That's the case.
I think it's Japan.
Forgive me.
Yeah, I think that there's. I think we've gotten off of what is the definition of a mentally healthy person, but I think that we would be remiss if we didn't address that. I mean, one of the reasons that we're talking on a podcast right now about men's mental health is that particularly you recognized in your work a need for men to have conversations with each other about what's going on, about our mental state. And I was just talking to you about some statistics from the Democratic National Committee just spent upwards of $6 million this year trying to figure out how do they reach out to men between 20 and 30, because we're finding that radicalization is happening. Regardless of what side of the aisle they're on, men in their 20s and 30s are being pushed towards the extremes of what, if we can just agree for a moment, for the sake of argument, that there's a political dichotomy with a right and a left, they're finding that men that are staying left in this past decade of tumultuous conversation around men's mental health within our society, they're tending to go to the extreme progressive left. That was a large portion of Bernie Sanders' base during his run, which was Bernie Sanders was considered the progressive candidate. We could go off on that for a second, but we won't. He was considered the progressive candidate for young men.
Progressive candidate.
Yeah,
we're not going there.
Yeah, and the other side though is undeniably the whether you want to call it the alt-right pipeline, whether you want to call it the manosphere, the bro space, whatever we're doing with whatever we're doing right now with a response to these bro talks, the other end is going towards undeniably fascism, and so that research produced a couple of things. The researchers, they called it the SAM initiative, ended up going back to the DNC and saying that they should advertise in video games and they should use Gen Z coded language more.
Now, where I fall with that is just like the rich and poor gap is just so clear. Like,
Yeah.
DNC paying $6 million to find out, video games and Gen Z language is just like so disconnected from
Yeah.
what's going on. I do think that men are, dare I say, privileged in some ways. That a lot of times, if I meet guys around my age, if they're speaking about like social or political issues, they're deeply concerned about financial issues, about the gap between the rich and the poor, and a lot of times they're also concerned about social issues. But I feel like I hear that first from them, and so if they're voting on an issue, it is probably going to be the economy, which does kind of relate to everyone.
Which
Um,
we can get into whole other discussions on whether or not the parties have been successful in presenting what their economic plans actually are and are they following through on them. But at the end of the day, I think you're right. Young men in the United States, in particular, this last election cycle, we have seen we're tapped into in a conversation around economics.
Yeah, and I also think that if we're talking about men's mental health, I think that there's a lot of young men these days who don't feel they just don't feel like the political system is working for them right now, and I think that that can also be really discouraging for young men. I think that there are a lot of kind of hurdles for to be a healthy, mentally man at this time. I think that abusive, hurtful men. We've all heard about them. The Not All Men campaign. Et cetera, et cetera. A lot of times it just means that you've been hurt, that something bad has happened to you, and you got traumatic reenactment. The idea that you enact the bad thing that happened to you on someone else, that's real and it happens. I also think that if people, I lost my train of thought, Ben.
That's okay. Let me take us back and aside.
Okay.
Let me give a message from Max and Ben Save the World a bit about this. Because we could wax casual for a long time about what's going on in our society and poke holes at what's wrong with it or not. Whether there even is something wrong with it. Regardless, I think ultimately what our goal in our conversation today and our conversation in the episodes forthcoming this season is that we can give some level of a prescriptive conversation of here are some good things to do.
Yeah.
No matter
Yeah.
how
Want it to be
fucked you
constructive.
think the world is or isn't, it's a little bit fucked. And what do you do about it? What do you, individual sitting in your chair right now, the third chair through this fourth wall, with us, do about that? And ultimately, a lot of what my answer is going to be is what's right for you. And that's like a super not descriptive, not super helpful answer.
Such a therapist answer.
It's
Ben.
such a therapist cop-out answer, but I mean it. I think that there's some level of you could pick anything to be your guiding light to get out of this darkness or whatever darkness you're experiencing. On some level, I can acknowledge that not all lights are going to be the same for getting you out of that darkness, but the fact that you're picking one up is probably what's most important. And so I think to me, we talked a bit about this before the show. Authenticity, as described by Rogers or Viktor Frankl, is one of those prescriptions for stepping out of darkness. Finding meaning, as you noticed, I touched on a little bit earlier.
Yeah.
Finding a meaning for your life sounds like a huge, heavy question. And there are many different ways to go about that. I know that through the writings of Viktor Frankl, he's a Holocaust survivor, which is kind of his credentials to get your foot in the door for me to say, let me quote him in saying, but that doesn't matter. His writings on human suffering, he believed that the human condition was one of suffering, that all mankind was going to experience suffering, and that all suffering was equal. And I think that it's kind of badass that this guy coming from a concentration camp is kind of laying down the WWE title belt of suffering to say all human suffering is equal. My suffering is not the same as yours because you experienced it objectively or subjectively through your own experiences. And the only thing that I can do is to help another human along the journey of learning what to do with that suffering, right? How to make the world a better place in spite of what you experienced, right? And it comes in different ways. It shows up in our culture in lots of different ways. I feel like I've heard so many times, be the adult that you wish you had as a kid. That's another form of that same message, right? Meaning is constructed. If you ask me, the world is absurd. None of it makes sense. Our systems are all a fist fight away from breaking.
Oh, wow.
And the only thing that you can do is say to yourself, this is what matters to me. And it can really hurt. I can attest personally, it can hurt a lot when you have to wrestle with none of it mattering, and finding out what does matter and what is worth pursuing and what is good and what is right is different from person to person.
I think that sometimes if you see something wrong going on, our reaction, if we feel like we can't change it, is, well, then maybe none of it matters.
Yeah.
Because we're trying to defend ourselves from this horrible thing is happening and we don't like it.
Yeah.
You know, it's interesting. I kind of wanted to be a shithead when you said the Viktor Frankl, all suffering is equal. And I was like, okay, Ben, so, the suffering of the incel bros who watch Andrew Tate,
No,
is the same as, women who get raped.
Yeah, that's a good one. That's the worst would you rather
I know.
I've
yeah.
heard spit at
I
me
wanted to be
ever.
such a shithead. And, that's a false equivalency. Obviously, being
It
raped is
is.
bad. But, here's where I'm at is like, I think that people have experiences, and if you don't listen to experiences, they are not going to listen to you.
Yeah.
And that's something that I struggle with because obviously, like, those two things that I said, they are not equal. And I do not think that they're equal. I want to be extraordinarily clear about that. But if you're in this space and you're going to tell someone, like, your suffering doesn't mean anything, they're going to be like, yeah, go fuck yourself. Like,
But
10 minutes later.
I
They
think
totally will.
It's so profound to come from this angle of like, yeah, if we wanted to sit down and sort out, we could use math, we could use science, we could use academic means to figure out what's the most painful thing, what's the most mentally, emotionally, all of that. And they've done all sorts of studies like that and things, right? We know that there's physiologically a response to a broken heart, for example. But coming from this perspective of, I would argue it as like radical humanism, is this idea that every person is only referentially able to experience suffering of others or empathetically through the lens of their own suffering.
Yeah.
All other humans, from one individual to another, the only way I can experience your suffering when you share it with me is for me to have some level of thermometer or measure with which I am comparing that.
I don't know if you have that therapist feeling when a client tells you something where you're like, oh shit, I know that.
Yeah.
And then you go, oh yeah. And yeah. I've had that feeling. I don't know if viewers have had that feeling. I don't know if you've had that feeling, but I know that feeling definitely is a part of at least my human experience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Should I go on about some poorly explained philosophy, Ben?
Yeah, our timing is great. It's like we've done this show before or something. But
yes,
we're right at the halfway point. So
it's been a little while.
Maybe let's talk a little philosophy. Speaking of Viktor Frankl, let's talk about some philosophy.
It's okay. Yeah. Well, I think there's some good philosophers out there.
Yeah.
I recently finished reading Meditations by Marcus Aurelius, and you've not read this book?
No. I've certainly encountered some excerpts. I specifically remember season 1. We're making a master list of, or what we thought at the time was a good list of like quotes, which I have no idea where that even is.
I don't remember
of quotes to end our show with. And I remember pulling up several Marcus Aurelius things that were from Meditations.
Okay.
At the time, so I'm curious what stood out to you and stuff.
Yeah, no. Yeah. So, I mean, I don't know if everyone knows Marcus Aurelius. He was a Roman emperor, 2,000 years ago. And he wrote this private journal, which has posthumously been titled Meditations. There was a really funny internet meme I had seen one time that had, someone saw Marcus Aurelius was alive, and they're like, "Oh, the author of that really famous book," and he's like, "The what?" I mean, like his private, journal is just everyone's like common knowledge now. But yeah, so he's a proponent of Stoic philosophy. He was an emperor in a very positive era for Rome. I think it was a part of the Golden Era. But
the Visigoths and the Gauls weren't economically
the
defeating them.
Weren't necessarily at the gates at the time. But he's a proponent of the Stoic philosophy, which a lot of times means, maybe be a little bit more reserved with your emotions, is kind of like what most people think about with it. But I think that what I was intrigued by is that he really encourages you to question things and to study philosophy. And when he says study philosophy, I'm kind of like, what does that exactly mean? And I had to, just briefly think about it. But ultimately he just means like study, learn, think, because even like all disciplines really came out of philosophy, and I do feel like therapy is kind of like the philosophizing of the
Hmm.
modern day. I think that sometimes therapy is really focused around coping strategies these days, which I think, yes,
That's a product of
of
empirical
course,
studies,
yes, and
right? The need for empirical
and if
evidence.
someone doesn't even know what their body feels like when they get angry, like, well, no shit, of course they need to know what their body feels like when they get angry, and how to take deep breaths or go punch a pillow and whatever the heck else is going on. But Marcus Aurelius was kind of like, yeah, you got to ask questions, which I think was, really more in line with kind of like the Freudian and kind of like Frankl, version of psychotherapy, where you're thinking about what is meaning, what is this, what are the questions that I want to ask the world.
Which there
Um,
would be a line that you could draw on the history of Socratic questioning from Socrates to Alexander the Great to Marcus Aurelius to
yeah, I don't know
Freud,
if Alexander the
right?
Great was all about
He was,
Stoicism,
wasn't he?
but yeah, I mean, I don't know if he wrote. I gotta remember if
Pretty
he
sure
wrote
that
books. Yeah.
Alexander the Great studied under. I always get Plato and Aristotle mixed up,
Oh
but he
yeah, that
studied
is.
under one
He
of them in
was,
his
I
court.
believe, Plato.
Yeah,
Was after Aristotle. But yeah, so Marcus Aurelius really wants you to study, which honestly makes you mentally well. Is
yeah.
kind of his assertion there. He does talk about really quite a bit about avoiding impure actions and impure thoughts, which really sounds like almost Christian perspective.
Yeah.
Sometimes he does have a little bit of like divinity in there that he's talking about. But that you really have to stop talking about what it is to be a good man. You have to just be one. Is kind of what he said.
Yeah.
Where you're not really overthinking about. You're not on a podcast talking about what is it to be a mentally healthy man. You're just
Yeah.
going and doing it, which
Yeah.
honestly sounds so just like butch and just like, yeah, you gotta go, just be a good man. Just stop bitching about it and
Yeah.
just get it done a little bit. Which I'm kind of like, okay about, but at the same time, like, I think that preaching emotional control it's a traditionally masculine trait. And one reason that I think that therapy is for guys is because like emotional control is masculine, and if you go to therapy, you're gonna get control of your emotions. Okay, like eventually, sure, yeah, you're gonna have some bad days, but I think that a lot of times guys do not feel competent if they are going to therapy, when really it's just like you're just going and you're gonna make yourself better. You're
Yeah.
studying. You're admitting
It's a
that
tool of competency.
you're strong, and that you're admitting that something could be wrong with you and that you're going to be better. And if someone wants to have a problem with it, they can take it up with you, and then you can let them know the business
Yeah.
a
Well,
little
and
bit.
I think it's fair to share too for viewers that maybe haven't gone to therapy or haven't explored therapy options for themselves. You don't have to feel like something's wrong.
Yeah.
A therapist can be incredibly helpful for sorting out what am I doing with my life? Where am I going next? What path should I take?
Yeah.
Can be very useful for sorting out, why does this feel this way? Why do I react so harshly when my kid says this, or when my partner says this, or when I'm at work and my boss emails this innocuous thing, but I get really anxious about it. That isn't necessarily.
Did you
One
mean
doesn't
angry?
have, or angry or whatever it is. Yeah, right. There's all sorts of different reactions, and therapy can just be a really good space for like, to put it in like gun terms, real masculine gun terms. That can help you sight in your scope on what are you aiming at. Like,
Sure.
what am I trying to fix? What am I trying to pursue?
Yeah, and I think it's interesting, Ben, that we talked about how are you mentally healthy for so long, and I think that there's definitely a movement among men that like we don't need therapy, or the gym is my therapy, or Marcus Aurelius
I'm fighting
meditations.
demons in the gym, bro.
Yeah, Marcus Aurelius's meditations is my therapy.
Mm-hmm.
And like I think that if you are finding help from the gym, I think that that's great. If you are finding help from meditations by Marcus Aurelius, I think that that is great. I think that if you are coping on your own and it is not going well, I think you should go to therapy, and I think that that's essential to being a healthy man these days. And I think that being just unafraid to be like, yeah, okay, sometimes I get nervous. Sometimes I get really pissed off when my girlfriend says this. Sometimes I get really pissed off when my dad says this, and I don't want to be pissed off like that anymore. So what the hell am I gonna do? I think that requires courage, and it just sounds kind of cheesy at this point. But I think that Ben, like I think that there is this idea of like a stoic bro these days who's kind of like, well, I don't really need therapy, I just need stoicism, or I need this. And I think that there's several apps that are like, here's stoic philosophy, to support your mental health.
Yeah.
I guess what's your vibe on, what is stoicism's relationship with therapy, especially
Yeah.
for men?
Yeah, well, a couple of things that you touched on there that I thought were pretty fascinating. Um, First one, just to step you back 1 second, was uh, uh, therapy and whether or not men feel like they need it in today's society, or is just reading some Marcus Aurelius, some stoicism, or quotes that I get fed from me from whatever stoic, from whatever podcast I watch or whatever, enough. And one thing that spurned in me was thinking about, we're going to get to a whole episode on spirituality,
Yeah.
but it would be disingenuous to not, and I think it might be more, actually, I think it would be more appealing maybe to some of our more conservative minded viewers and listeners, to present the analogy of, in today's society, the separation of church and state within the West has largely created this situation wherein, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, village tribal society, you needed to talk about something man to man with a leader in your community. It was probably going to be a religious leader. But in the secular day and age that we're in, where there is so much freedom of religion and spirituality, those roles, while it could be, there's all sorts of facets that we could talk about how that was damaging to certain marginalized members of those communities. They were helpful. There are many, many clergymen and pastors across the gamut of religions that there are today that are excellent and wise counselors, little c, right? And the role within our social structures and societies that a therapist can take on in today's day and age is really, in a lot of ways, science's empirically backed answer to, sometimes you need a talking man, sometimes or woman, but this is a men's mental health podcast. Sometimes a guy just needs to go talk to another guy about something, and he needs to find one that's kind of wise enough in the ways of having a problem and solving it.
I think that another level, I really like what you said, and I think that another level is that women today many times are tired of dealing with men's shit.
Yeah.
You had shared an article today that women are giving up on marriage, which, whole thing for straight men trying to date women at this time. But I will say that I consistently hear from women that they don't want to feel like they're babying a husband, and I think that men, a lot of times they're kind of like, I want to share with a woman, because if you're sharing with a man, you're being vulnerable.
Yeah.
But I think that like, if men got to work something out, they got to work something out, and that's okay.
And I think regardless of where you fall on it, I could go off on an aside of like, perhaps true feminism, the ideal of equality, might more involved in egalitarian heterosexual relationships, might look a little bit more involved, as you described there, right? Than maybe women have been taught, right? We've got this whole through line for hundreds and hundreds of years of Western culture's history that men are to go out and provide and all of these things. And if we're to have a true conversation about what is an egalitarian relationship between two human beings, regardless of their gender, look like, we might have to address the fact that men are conditioned to not complain. Men are conditioned to put up with it. The some of the statistics that you were just referring to that we were talking about earlier, involved women coming forward with the perspective that they recognize that despite the fact that undergraduate is overwhelmingly majority female now,
Yeah.
Undergraduate programs are majority female, and men are increasingly finding themselves in a situation where, despite wanting to be financially and physically capable of providing for a family, our society and our workforce is not letting them.
And so we have a male loser epidemic.
According to Fox News, we have a male loser epidemic. And actually, to loop that a bit back to your question about what is Stoicism's relationship to all of this, Let me mask right off. I think that the 2 cent fucking dollar store shitty ass stoicism that you get peddled out on our news feeds, whether it's Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, or it's in the little bottom advertisement at the bottom of your USA Today online subscription, what have you, is a tool that's being used against our young men. It's an attractive, hipstery-ish. It's hipsterism for conservatives in a lot of ways. It's attractive. It's cool. Being the rugged guy out in the woods that doesn't give a shit about nothing. And he comes home with stuff to provide for his family regardless. Is cool when viewed through the lens of our culture and all of the ways that it has put pressure on men for hundreds of years. But if we want to have an honest conversation about what is a man who has interacted with Stoicism, looked at its guiding principles, and walked away with, you find in yourself a man that is a lot more secure in who he is, regardless of whether or not he's able to be the most productive man in the neighborhood. And I think that American individualism interacting with that is still coming off of the old phrase from the 50s of keeping up with the Joneses. We've built a whole culture, a consumerist culture, around needing to be as good or personally in some way that we arbitrarily attribute meaning better than the guy next door. And for a decent while, the previous number of generations have been somewhat successful in doing that. Good enough is, well, Bob down the street has a 24-inch TV, and our family only has a 20, but we've got a newer fridge. And nowadays, we're getting shoved articles down our throats about not getting avocado toast being the key to our financial future. Well, we're getting strangled at the bank, you know?
Yeah, I think I wouldn't be as harsh as you are on Stoicism, Ben. But
No, I'm saying it's good. I think it's being co-opted. Let me be more clear.
Oh, you think
I think it has been co-opted and disingenuously presented as an attractive way to shove kids down a pipeline.
Yeah.
And that pipeline isn't great.
I think that it is complex.
Yeah.
I think that if you think about someone who is stoic, you're talking about someone who is appearing as emotionless.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that in today's society, you are encountering a culture where emotional intelligence is really an essential job skill. Mm-hmm. That you can't go to a construction job without being like, can I read this room? Mm-hmm. Rather than just being like, no, I am in control of my emotions. Like, you got to be able to figure out
I can speak from experience. Being on a job site, you got to have the emotional intelligence to know whether or not, say, your foreman just drove into work at 4 in the morning, and if you pick up the vibe that guy definitely got in an argument with his wife before he got here today, maybe you don't ask him too many questions when he tells you to go do something. Maybe you just go do it. Is a little bit different, or so and so on the other side of the project is
same situation.
You got to be connected to that. I think it runs all the way through all aspects of our society. I think emotional intelligence is underrated as a incredibly helpful skill for men to have.
I think that it's complicated these days. I feel like there's a picture of the old construction site where guys just, they did what they were supposed to do. They built their thing and then they just moved on. And the reality is that, everyone just seems a little bit more comfortable expressing their feelings. And, if you're able to do your job and kind of move on, that's great. I'm so glad you can do that. Sometimes I'm going to have to get my feelings off my chest. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's just a little bit of me.
I think that's another reckoning that we have to have. We're having this conversation right now, but it's only a small piece. It's a drop in a what hopefully will one day be an ocean across time of mankind and men in general having this conversation and exploring the what if. Like, hey, maybe some of this shit that our fathers told us because their fathers told them and their fathers told them, we've kept repeating for no reason. And as we examine whether or not they're helpful and useful to us for our conceptualizations of life and the meaning of what it is to find happiness and all of that, maybe we do throw out some of the things that aren't as useful anymore.
Yeah. I think that if you find something that's not useful in your life, you can throw it out.
Yeah.
And if you find something that's helpful in your life, including Marcus Aurelius' meditations, or some TikToker who talks about stoicism,
Hmm.
keep it in your life.
Yeah, and I don't even want to. I don't want to disparage too much. Even I think that it would be disingenuous to say that the Andrew Tates or the other the Bro podcasts or Joe Rogans of the world that are scooping up men in droves and giving them some level of guidance aren't doing some service, because at the end of the day, what to quote myself 20 minutes ago, 30 minutes ago, some light in the darkness is better than none.
Well, I think that they're speaking to men. I think that Joe Rogan is a curious man, and I think that he asks questions.
And I think they're
Um,
meeting a need. So there's
yeah.
something there.
I think that men want to be in space with each other, and I
Yeah.
think that there's a lot of layers to masculinity. I think politically that are just kind of present, omnipresent even, and I think that Andrew Tate makes people feel that they can be competent.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna go back to my competent.
No, I
my
think it's a
favorite
great
word,
lens.
competent. We're gonna have a whole episode on competence.
Sure.
It's gonna be the greatest thing. No, I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're
Let
returning.
me pull up
Yeah,
some
yeah.
statistics while you introduce us here.
Yeah, for sure. So,
'Cause I know they're gonna
you
be
know,
useful.
first of all, on the topic of competence, you mentioned Laura Ingraham and this, male loser epidemic idea. So I think that it's not very kind to say that there's a male loser epidemic. I think that if men are not doing well, there's a lot of reasons they may not be doing well. And again, like this sense of competence, they want to feel like they're good at something, that they have a job that they can do, that they feel adequately supported in those situations. But a lot of times, if you are starting at a company these days, you're getting very minimal training, you're thrown to the wolves, you expected to just kind of do your job and barely make ends meet at home. You work hard, and what do you have to show for it? I think that that's a question that a lot of men are kind of asking themselves, and so then they quit their jobs and they maybe don't get the resume. And this has been going on for so many years with just the increasing wealth inequality. I mean, it was a prime issue of like Bernie Sanders' campaign in 2016. And I think one of the reasons that Trump was elected at that time, and since then I think it's been still a primary issue for a lot of guys and a lot of just people. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. Research shows that there's been a decrease in terms of like, and I'm not sure what the decrease was that we listed here, Ben. A decrease in the, I guess, independence of non-college educated women.
Yeah. I
Where-
actually just found it. That's what I was
Yeah.
looking for. You
Yeah,
knew where I was
okay.
going.
I was gonna say, he
Men's
went-
economic struggles. This is a quote from Wall Street Journal just last month. Men's economic struggles seem to be having the biggest effect on women without a college degree, whose marriage rates by age 45 have plummeted from 79% to 52% for those born between 1930 and 1980. So all that was a lot of numbers at once. So let me circle back at it. Women that do not have a college degree used
Yeah.
to be of age women. By the time they reached, I think it was like 30, 79% of them were married. That fell to women born in 1980. Currently, are at a 52% marriage rate.
Is it any surprise that blue collar workers are on the struggle bus?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not really a surprise.
Unfortunately, no.
I think that a lot of college educated people are struggling with, finances right now. And I feel like now we're just talking about systemic issues and, how can we even be mentally healthy in a world where it feels like no one is mentally healthy?
Yeah.
Like that's a really good question.
Well-
because anxiety breeds anxiety.
Yeah.
Go on.
Well, no. It certainly does. And being it's hard to be financially sure when we're throwing out statistics and things like that, and we're thinking about you were talking about blue collar workers, college educated workers. That information just there, right? Non college educated women marrying men, whether they're college educated or not, has gone down. This is coupled with the fact that roughly a third of our undergraduate programs are male nowadays. So, and and I was just looking at it. According to Pew Research, a bachelor's degree nets you about an extra $1 million worth of lifetime earnings across a reasonable person's lifetime. And so when we're looking at only a third of the people that are doing this thing, that if we view society as a perfect pyramid or stratified in such a way that a certain percentage of people need to get degrees to keep the things that need degrees running. If only a third of those people are men, and we've got this other issue coming at us head on and also men are overwhelmingly reporting lack of fulfillment in their life and their relationships. Dating is getting harder and harder. We're not finding partners, and women are reporting that they can't find. There's no men to find, and Fox News is going off on.
The men that they find are not good.
Yeah.
Is really what I think women's core experiences in dating.
Yeah.
I think that, at least I want to think it's bad out there.
Yeah.
We know it's bad out there. We're sorry it's bad out there. Here's my magic wand. I'm going to fix it.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that we, as men, there are things that we can do. I don't want you to feel powerless in terms of what's going on. To be a mentally healthy man, yeah, if you haven't been to therapy, you could go to therapy. We're also going to have other episodes where we talk about physical health, spiritual health, social health, a lot of other facets to your life so that you can really put the parts together and make a whole man again.
Yeah.
And it's not easy to do that. But I also think that being able to admit when you're wrong or that you need help can be really helpful as well. Just to kind of get over the I'm a man and I can ask for help, because it's not easy to do that, and if you are able to do that, more power to you, right?
Yeah, and I would say that if you're in a place where you can get that help, it's a privilege that is a shame to waste.
Yeah, and I think that if you are worried about the state of the world for whatever reason, no matter what your leaning is, get involved, do something. I think that, a lot of people after elections, they'd be like, well, I guess I'm going to, go get
Yeah,
involved
we had all sorts of people that were mobilized for all sorts of things recently.
Yeah, I think that that's another thing that you can do to kind of support your mental wellness and the idea of your sort of giving back. I think that if you like Marcus Aurelius, doing that is good. Reading anything, you can read Richard Reeves over there. You can read Yalom over there. There's lots of good people. You can read Schwarzenegger up there. Yeah, bodybuilding and fitness.
And we're getting into physical health next time.
We're getting physical health next time.
I think that another thing that's important for us as a part of this program and what we are, and a little bit of fourth wall breaking this, to do is we're having this conversation about what is mentally healthy, and as we come to more of a close towards it, is to just normalize and say, you touched on it just a second ago, it's entirely reasonable to be worried about what's going on right now. Our world is in a state that it can feel so weird as clinicians, as we're talking about what's normal, what's mentally normal. What is normal when there are all sorts of warning signs and indicators that history is repeating itself in all sorts of directions that really are not fun itineraries for the future to come? And I think that there are many better quotes than I could come up with on the spot right here about this phenomenon. But, the idea of what is normal is so subjective. And I think it's important to stop and say, you're still a normal person if you're struggling with what's in the news sometimes. I would consider it almost at this point, it might be a little abnormal if you're not at least a little anxious about the looming threat of war in multiple parts of our world right now. If you're not a little bit anxious about the economic uncertainty of our country, it's totally fine.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean that if you feel like it's something that you should talk about, you probably should pursue that feeling.
I think that there are people out there, Ben, who don't connect too much with world affairs, that they have just tuned it out because they felt like it was hopeless from the start and they don't want to talk about it. But I will say that one thing that makes you mentally healthy is being able to talk about hard things.
Yeah.
If you think about someone who was ever inspiring to you, were they talking about what they had for lunch that day? Were they talking about the weather? Were they talking about, got this wonderful home in beautiful Edina, and you were inspired and like, I really want to go, buy a home in Edina, Minnesota, with the home of rich Minnesotans, right? I'm sorry, no stereotypes allowed.
Mhm.
The reality is that inspiring people probably talk about hard things. They probably talk about, like, you think about, like, we have nothing to fear but fear itself. Winston Churchill during World War II, when everyone's literally killing each other, okay? Like, I mean, when there are difficult times, the reality is that you have an opportunity to do something great, something better than yourself. And I think that that's what, being Superman is about, Ben.
Yeah, might be. I haven't seen it yet. I hear it's very hope centered, and it's punk rock to be hopeful.
Yes.
Is one of the messages.
I
But
haven't seen it either.
yeah, I went to Eddington this last
Oh,
weekend.
sure. Yeah.
Wild ride.
Okay.
One of those movies where you walk out and you're like, I don't know how I felt about that movie,
Okay.
and I'm pretty sure that movie was not about what I think it was about. I have no idea.
How interesting.
Yeah, it was a very good one. Very good exploration of men and things that they do. Actually,
Oh, okay.
when in,
I think that it's getting a little bit more attention in some
Yeah.
of the mainstream media, which I'm really glad about.
um,
Should I end with a little conclusions?
oh, I've got a little Who Saved the World here
Okay,
section
yeah,
here.
we've done our conclusions then.
Oh,
Yeah.
unless you, yeah, sorry, I was misreading. Would you like to go ahead?
It's okay, yes. No, I just wanted to mention that, as we've discussed today, being mentally healthy requires a lot of facets. We're going to talk about a lot of them this season. You can keep your mind sharp by, doing crosswords, doing Jeopardy, doing whatever.
I do the
Be-
Wordle.
Wordle, being able to ask for help, and, just know that it's okay to be human, know that it's okay to feel like you want to be good at something, and then learn something to be good at. Doesn't matter what it is. I think you'll feel better about yourself.
Competency.
Competence. You're going to have 7 episodes on competence, a season on competence.
I wanted to close today's conversation with rather serendipitously what I would call kind of a Stoic lesson from Buddhism.
Oh.
Actually, there are several traditions of Zen Buddhism that have variations of the same story, but I'll surmise it for you here now. One day when the Buddha was teaching, he was teaching under a shade tree, and a large crowd had gathered. He was sharing many truths with people, and a man became very angry. He began yelling insults, and in some versions of the story, he even spits on the Buddha. And the Buddha continued. He continued teaching anyway, ignoring the man as he circled in the crowd and became more violent and angry. And eventually, the man became too violent for the Buddha to ignore, addressing the entire crowd. And the Buddha, in continuing his teaching, says to him, if you give me a gift and I refuse it, who does the gift belong to? And the man was perplexed for a moment, and turning more to the crowd than to the Buddha says, well, of course, the gift still belongs to me then. If I gave it to you and you refused it, it's still mine. And the Buddha said to him, that is what I'm choosing to do with your anger here today. I've never chosen to accept it, and so only you are the one that has to live with it. And that story obviously has dripping with meaning, but
Yeah.
there are many versions of the story where the man sits down and he continues to learn from the Buddha for the rest of his days, and there are stories where he goes and changes his life at home later. But I wanted to present that story today because I think that it's really relevant for the negativity that I think I see a lot of people complaining about they're experiencing online and in political divide within our nation and things like that. The core concept of what's there of, I've heard other variations of hatred is drinking poison and expecting someone else to die, right? That ultimately the only ownership and control that we have is over our own feelings and our own thoughts and our own actions. And there are all sorts of scholars that could say a lot more than me about, particularly religiously, regarding what that story means. But I think for us laymen here today in a random office talking about men's mental health, we can certainly acknowledge the message that is not internalizing other people's problems
Yeah.
when we're experiencing our own.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I like that. It's interesting.
Yeah, what do you make of it?
It's interesting because I do see parallels with Marcus Aurelius. I do see parallels with kind of like this, version of humanity where we have emotional restraint. And I think that the key of modern society is that, and there's also kind of this individual differences piece where I think that some people find that they're often very neutral emotionally and they can kind of coast through life and not a lot of things are going on. But then there's folks who kind of have like positive emotionality and negative emotionality. Like emotional stability is really a personality trait that you can kind of like, have, more or less of. And I think that people who get, very sad, angry, or nervous, like they have a lot of capability to be very charismatic
Mm-hmm.
and lead other people. And I think that by learning, kind of like the restraint, like, from Buddha and stuff like that, they're able to do really great things with their lives. But the reality is that those feelings will also come back. And, what do you kind of do with them is a good question. Yes, you can kind of argue it out of yourself in your head, but you can't really deny that they exist. And I really hope that viewers will understand that you can't really deny that your feelings exist. Doing
Yeah.
something, anything about them, will be helpful.
Yeah, and I would argue, I think many Stoics would agree that Stoicism isn't becoming a marbled piece of concrete that has no feelings. It's understanding them in such a way that they aren't a detriment to the others around you and your own goals.
We Vulcans have emotions, but we just suppress them.
Yeah, right? And I think the fun thing about everybody being able to quote Vulcans from Star Trek is how much Star Trek explored whether or not that's actually a good thing.
Yeah.
And I would argue that Gene Roddenberry very much fell on the side of the Vulcans were not correct.
I
Well,
suppose so.
I think that's all we've got for today. Thank you, Max, for sitting with me.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank you, Ben, for sitting with me.
Yeah, thank you, viewers, for joining us. We'll see you next time, 2 weeks from now, when we talk more about what makes a healthy man.
Yes, of course. Thanks so much.